Hello, guys. Welcome to my first real-time video on Patreon. One little caveat, this isn't quite full real-time. This is sped up to 150%, so it's a lot slower than my normal videos, which can be sped up as fast as 2000% or higher, just because I like to keep the length of the video to a minimum. I don't want to show 6 hours of drawing, sped up can be as much as 35-40 minutes, so I do speed up my normal art videos quite a bit. But recently, I created these paintings inspired by my home state of New Mexico. These are about 4 by 6 inches, so they're relatively small, and I painted them using gouache, which for me is actually a surprisingly quick medium to work with. So I decided to not speed these ones up as much and to show them to you guys in a more real-time setting. So I'm pretty new to the real-time video pace, and I'm definitely open to your feedback on what you'd like to hear me talk about in these videos and how you think I should best make use of the time. If you would like to just listen to some relaxing music, we can definitely do that. I have some nice instrumental music on in the background, and I'm more than happy just to let that play through the majority of the video. But since this video is being created solely for the purpose of my Patreon, I want you guys to have a say in what I talk about it in these videos. By the way, they're going to be largely unedited, so I'm not going to edit out my little burp noise that I just made there. You probably didn't even hear it, so we're going to move on. I'm not a gouache expert. So I don't really have a whole lot to say in terms of how to use gouache. I can definitely talk about how I used it in this video and my thought process behind it. But this isn't really going to be like a tutorial series or me breaking down step by step how you can create the same look. Because to be quite honest, I don't even know if I could create this same look again. I did a series of 3 paintings. I think I recorded 2 of them, and then one was on a live stream, so I don't have that raw footage on my main camera. But anyway, I can talk a little bit about this painting here. This was the first of the 3 that I did, and it was inspired by a few photos that I had seen online. I kind of took different aspects of each photo and combined them into something that I wanted to paint. So the reference pictures were really more to help me get a solid feel of the colors, the saturation of the colors and the contrast between the different colors in the paintings, and also just to kind of get a very basic composition down that I could then alter a little bit to fit my style and what I was going for. I really loved this painting because of that road stretching off into the distance. It created a lot of depth. I think I ended up curving the road a little bit more than my reference picture. But the other thing I loved about this painting was the really cool contrast between the blue in the sky and the more orangey tones that are going to be in the foreground, which I have not laid down yet. In working with gouache, my experience thus far has been that it's hard to get the water to paint ratio just right. I find myself often having to go back over certain areas and layer them so that there's no streaks, and I get that very matte, opaque look when it dries down. You can see I'm sort of having this problem here with the road, and it's more evident here because this was an area of the painting that I wanted to be super flat. In the sky, I don't mind that texture so much just because it sort of adds to that effect. But for the road, I didn't want those streak marks because it kind of took away from that foreshortening aspect I was going for. So once I layer it up a couple of times, I usually am a lot happier with the look. However, I do still struggle overall with just getting that water to paint ratio down. And when I'm working with the paints this time, I had squeezed out some fresh paint, so I am working with it directly out of the tube for most of this painting. In the future paintings that I will be showing also, I'll be working with the gouache from a dried state. And just kind of to allude to that experience now, I found it a lot more difficult to work with the paint after it had been dried in the palette, and I had to re-wet it and then paint. There's just something about fresh paint that makes a lot more sense to me when using gouache. It feels a lot more like acrylic that way. In fact, in my earliest experiences using watercolor, I used to use it mostly out of the tube because I liked that very thick, dense feel of the paint. And it's almost very much the same thing here. So I'm not super happy with how the Arteza gouache dries down and re-wets, although I can't necessarily speak to whether that's unique to the Arteza paints or not, because I'm still very new in the world of gouache and I have a lot of other gouache that I would like to try. One thing that I am fascinated by with gouache, and I do find myself really enjoying, is the ability to layer lighter colors over darker colors. I think part of this just comes from the fact that I don't get to do this with a lot of other mediums that I use. With watercolor, traditionally you work lightest to darkest because anytime you have to go back and lift the paint, it can kind of be a gamble. You don't really know what you're going to get. And while lifting definitely has its place in watercolor, it's not really meant to be a technique that you use all of the time. Same goes for markers. There's definitely a strategy to layering lighter markers over darker markers to get certain effects, but in general, you can't use lighter markers over darker markers. The pigment will change and it will look different. So gouache is something that almost reminds me of digital art in this way, where I don't have to worry about layering a lighter color over a darker color. Maybe it's just because I've been doing more digital art lately, but my brain is really kind of in that mindset of like working in layers, and it doesn't matter if the layer underneath is lighter or darker, the color on top will show up. So gouache for me is more like digital art than it is like watercolor painting, if that makes sense. Now here I am layering in the orangey earth tones for the middle ground and foreground. I loved this color in the reference pictures, and I feel like it took a little bit of work just to get the right tone. I think at this point I was thinking about how my gray tone might have not had the proper warmth to it. The undertone was a little bit off, but I think I kind of tweak it a little bit as we go, and once the whole painting comes together, I didn't feel as weird about the undertone. Although, looking at it now, those streaks are still being a little bit bothersome. Another thing you might be noticing about me using gouache, and also this is just me painting in general, I really don't clean my water very often. Just looking back at the video now, I'm just like, that water is so disgusting. And I'm pretty sure I don't change it out for a while yet. I'm a very lazy painter. I want minimal effort in my paintings. I do not want to have to change the water. And it's something that with watercolor, I feel like it drives me nuts when I have to change the water so frequently when I use watercolor, because it will really alter the color of the paint. So yeah, I'm watching myself back now and I'm cringing a little bit because I should have changed the water by now. I just went right from blue to orange. You know. So I'm curious what your guys' experience with gouache is. I've only used one brand of gouache so far, so I can really only speak for my experience using Arteza. But as I've alluded to many times in videos, I have lots of other brands. Well, not lots of other brands, but I have a few other brands of gouache that I have been meaning to try out for a while now. And I'm curious to see how they perform differently, because now I feel a little bit more experienced with the Arteza gouache. I definitely feel like I have more of a sense of how to get the look that I want, and a little bit of a sense of how to control it. It's definitely still different painting to painting, and I'm learning a lot. I definitely learned a lot after creating this mini series of these 3 paintings, but I do find myself more and more comfortable with the medium, and definitely wanting to reach for the medium more and more. Looks like I finally also switched to a smaller brush. Let's see, it's been a few weeks since I've painted this, so this voiceover, it's like you and I are both experiencing it for the first time. So here, oh yes, I actually really liked this part. I feel like it brought so much dimension and life to the painting. So if you've ever seen photographs of desert scenery in places like New Mexico and Arizona, and maybe even parts of California and Utah as well, we have these really cool red rock formations that are just really beautiful. They're not mountains in the traditional sense. They're more like flat top mountains, or what we call mesas, meaning table. So they're more flat, and they're just really cool. They remind me so much of where I grew up, and it's a very traditional looking scene for like New Mexico. It captures that desert feel, but at the same time, what I love is it captures the brightness of the landscapes, because really when you look at it, the sky is that blue and the mountains are that red, and it just, that natural contrast is something that is just so beautiful, and it's something that I almost associate with where I grew up, like that the color scheme of blue and orange, that complementary balance, is something that just to this day is my favorite complementary color duo. And maybe it has a little bit of something to do with where I grew up, but this painting really captures it perfectly. And at this point, I feel like I was starting to feel a lot more confident about this painting, because even though I didn't know exactly why I was placing these shadows in these areas, it just really brought it to life. So by this point in the painting, I wasn't referencing my photo very closely. I had gotten out of it what I needed out of it. I'd gotten the basic shapes and colors down, and so at this point I was kind of just winging it, and I think it paid off pretty well, because I just sort of was going with what my eye felt was right. If I put a color down and I didn't feel like it belonged there, I would just go over it again. But then bringing out those highlights and those shadows really made it pop and feel like real rock. Here's another part I didn't really plan out very well. This is something I probably should have been a little bit more sure of, but I think it turned out okay. Painting the yellow stripes in the middle of the road and ensuring that it followed all the way back into the distance was tricky. I remember feeling a little bit nervous when I set out to do this part of the painting, but then also not really stopping to plan it out any better. I didn't have any sketch down for this painting at all. And even if I did, I probably would have painted over it with the gouache and not been able to see it by this point anyway. So I was winging it here, and like I said, I think it turned out okay. I'm not going to be too harsh on myself if the perspective isn't perfect, but I think it looks really good. And I think by this point, just all of the colors in the painting, I was already pretty happy with it. and I was really liking the look. Similar to my experience painting the yellow stripes, it was also a little bit stressful to paint these white outlines on the side of the road, but what a difference it made in just separating and defining the road from the rocks on either side. You guys, this whole experience with this painting just made me really happy. There is something very stress relieving about just sitting down and painting something without having to worry about staying in the lines. Like I mentioned, I didn't have a sketch down on the page before this, and I just kind of went for it. Yes, I had a reference picture, but I was also changing and making decisions about what I didn't want to take from that reference picture on the spot as I was going. So I think what I learned here is that I can trust my artistic instinct well enough that I know when something is going to look good on a paper in a painting, and that I can trust that instinct a lot more than I give myself credit for. The final step of this painting is really just some finishing touches, but they do bring it all together. Coming up is one of my favorite parts of this painting, and it sounds a little bit silly, but I start painting clouds in the sky, and just the way that they look, you guys, it was like my own little Bob Ross moment, and I don't say that lightly. I didn't know painting clouds could be so fun, and I think with gouache, I have the ability to just create so much texture and dimension that it's almost like the clouds painted themselves. Like literally, I feel like I barely did anything and boom, there were clouds. Like there's just naturally areas when painting with gouache that end up with a little bit more pigment and look brighter and highlighted, and then areas that look softer and blend in with the blue. It's literally like I didn't have to do anything and there were clouds, and that's exactly what the clouds look like from where I'm from. It was crazy. So I definitely want to do more landscape paintings in the future with gouache, and potentially even some bigger landscapes. I'm curious to know if you have any suggestions about landscape ideas that you would like to see me try, places that you grew up, or places that you just think would be really beautiful if painted in gouache. And then after I paint the clouds, really the final touch is just to add some greenery to the background. There wasn't a lot of greenery in my reference picture, and that's accurate because there's not a lot of greenery in New Mexico, at least parts of it. The other painting that I do in this series has a lot more green, and it's a painting of more like a mountain landscape during the fall time when the leaves are changing. So New Mexico can look very different depending on where in New Mexico you go, which is another part that I don't think a lot of people know about New Mexico. So part of this series, I think, was really just me getting to show off where I grew up, even though it was a very small place to grow up. I don't regret growing up there because I think I got exposed to a lot of really cool parts of my culture and amazing food. And there's definitely times where growing up in a small town feels really good. So I was happy to dedicate this month to New Mexico. So it's at this point where I'm realizing doing a real-time voiceover is a little bit daunting because I am flat out of things to talk about, and we still have 5 minutes left in this painting. So in these last few moments, I just want to ask you guys again, what do you want out of these real-time videos? How can I make them the most beneficial to you so that when I record my next voiceover in real time, I'm able to be a little bit more helpful? Or if you just want music on in the background, I completely understand, and I can do that. In fact, I'm happy to do that. I just want to know what's best for you guys and what you're looking for in these more slow, real-time videos. Hopefully, even just getting to see a little bit more of my process slowed down has been helpful for those of you who are interested in the technique aspect. I think if you're anything like me, you probably learn by watching. And so I'm definitely open to just uploading videos in real time just so that you can watch a little bit more closely with what I'm doing. But if there is something that you would like to see that you didn't get to see this time around, just drop a comment and let me know. Thank you again for choosing to support my Patreon. I really do genuinely appreciate it. And I'm super looking forward to what the future holds. Okay, I'm going to end the voiceover here. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the internet. Enjoy the music.